Hi, Alison here. I'd like to talk to you today about something called the domino effect. Now, if you're watching this and you have a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, post-viral syndrome, long COVID, any of these, it's likely that you have a whole wide range of different symptoms, which can seem really crazy. You think, how on earth can I have all of these things at the same time? And that can often underpin that long, long trek from specialist to specialist as they look at one after the other. And an increasing sense that you're not actually allowed to have all those many things wrong with you at the same time, so that it must be in your head. There's something wrong with your mind rather than your body. And that was certainly what happened to me. So I had, initially I had pain in my neck. And I had numbness and tingling in my fingers, and I kept dropping things. So I was sent to a spinal surgeon and then on to a neurologist who found nothing. I was having horrendous problems with my period, so I was sent to a gynecologist who gave me a womb ablation. I had recurrent tonsillitis over a period of years, so I went to an ENT specialist who took my tonsils out. And I had problems with depression, with brain fog, with forgetting things, not turning up to appointments, not being able to read. And so my GP put me on antidepressants. And I see a lot of people who have all of these symptoms, but maybe also on top of that, things like IBS, which is very common as well, and other autoimmune disease symptoms. And we can look at this and say, why on earth would my numb fingers have anything to do at all with my tonsils? One of my breakthrough moments came when I actually found a list of my symptoms online under the heading of fibromyalgia. And I thought, fantastic, I've got something to take to my GP now. And I asked for a rheumatologist referral. And the rheumatologist diagnosed me with fibromyalgia. And my expectation was that they would be able to explain why all of these symptoms were happening to me and have some sort of a treatment plan to help me forward. And if you shared this process of diagnosis, you will know how devastating it can be when you get your hopes up after years and years of a quest for answers, only to be told, we don't really understand this. And the best we can offer you is maybe a referral to a fatigue clinic or a pain clinic. And essentially, you're just going to have to learn to cope with this and adapt to your new life. I was lucky, incredibly lucky, in that I was pointed towards the Chrysalis Effect, and that's the online recovery program I now work alongside as a wellbeing coach and recovery specialist. And the Chrysalis Effect shared with me something that they called the domino effect. And this was an explanation which drew on so much of the knowledge I already had as a nurse about physiology and the way the human mind and body work, that made perfect sense of all of this. So I want to share that with you today. So we use this slide to explain to clients what exactly is going on in their body and why all of these different symptoms are actually connected. And you can trace them back to the root of something you can actually do something about. And what you might notice is in the middle there is this set of dominoes set up as part of this game that I think we're probably all familiar with, where you put the dominoes on end in a long line so that when you tip one at one end, it will knock the next one and then the next one and the next one. So the whole lot will crash in this really quite pleasing ripple effect. And what you can do as well is set it up so it forks. So maybe one of the dominoes will knock two, and so it will branch off. And you can have really complex setups where just by knocking one domino over, you can have the end dominoes at several different points tip over in the end. And this is very much what happens in your body. So in a previous video, I talked about triggers and the fact that triggers only work when you have a gun that is loaded and primed. So while you might think that the trigger for your illness, whether it is COVID or another virus, or whether it's an operation or a bereavement, we talk about triggers as if they are causes. Well, the domino effect will explain what was happening in the run-up to that trigger, which actually primed and loaded your gun, in effect, so that when that final trigger event happened, there's this cascade of imbalance that goes throughout your body and has an impact on all sorts of different systems. And that this doesn't tend to be picked up by medicine because medicine operates in silos, so people specialize. And so the person who was looking at my numbness and tingling fingers had absolutely no interest at all in my womb. So let's look at this a little bit more closely from the work that the Chrysalis Effect has done and the patterns that we see in clients who come to us of what's happened to them before that final domino was pushed, which started a whole cascade of reactions in their bodies that led to a serious health crash. And what we see in every case is that they have been physically and emotionally overwhelmed. So they will have had years and years of chronic stress, anxiety, but also of putting enormous physical demands on their bodies, pushing through at work or as carers or whatever else that they are doing in their lives. And that this has, in effect, set them up. It set up the dominoes in a row so that when they've caught COVID or another virus, when they've had a bereavement or an operation, it tips that first domino and the whole lot crash. So the initial response has ripple effects throughout the whole body, producing this wide range of different, very, very confusing symptoms. Now, most of you probably have learnt about the fight and flight response and the effects of stress on the human body and on animals in school. So that might be a familiar phrase to you already. There's fight or flight. And this is what happens when there is an acute threat to your existence. This is something that is built into you instinctively as an animal. What we also see, the third F, sometimes people talk about, is freeze. And that's when running away from the source of the threat or fighting it isn't really a possibility. And you will see an animal, particularly a prey animal, freeze, hunker down and play dead in the hope that the predator will miss them and carry on. Or that if they are actually attacked, that they are so shut down that they won't suffer through it. So that's fight, flight, freeze. And then in our human world, we have a fourth F, and this one is often described as fawn. And that's what happens when you, for example, live with somebody who's very unpredictable. So every moment that you're with them, that you're walking on eggshells because you never know whether they're going to criticize you or explode, or it may be that they're going to dissolve in tears if you say the wrong thing. So you are always on high alert and you are fawning, and that means that you are trying to manage your behavior to affect them so that they don't tip over into becoming a threat. So what's happening in your body during these fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses, which is pretty much the same thing, is that your body has two wings to its nervous system. So you have your sympathetic nervous system, which is the one that pushes you into fight or flight, gets you ready. And you have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is designed to bring it back into balance afterwards. And those work in tandem with what we call your HPA axis. So that's the hypothalamus in your brain and your pituitary gland and your adrenals. And together they release what's known as the stress hormones, which again prepare your body to deal with the threat that you're facing. So, for example, if this tiger attacks you, you will have a sudden rush of adrenaline, your sympathetic nervous system will come online, and you will suddenly be very, very focused and very alert, and your blood will be full of adrenaline. And the effects of this is felt throughout the body. And the aim of it is to get you prepared. So the blood supply is diverted. And if you're under threat, you don't need to be digesting anything. So the blood is diverted away from your gut and from your periphery. You don't need to think particularly because this is an instinctive reaction. So the blood is channeled away from your brain and it's redirected to your heart and your lungs and your major muscles so that you are able to run and have the energy and bring in the oxygen you need to actually escape. So what we've seen is that an acute stress result produces changes in your nervous system and in your adrenal system, your hypothalamus, your pituitary, to produce hormones which change your entire body to prepare you to meet the threat and to try and survive it. And what's supposed to happen is after that acute threat has subsided, your parasympathetic nervous system is supposed to kick in to bring everything back into balance again, to calm your nervous system and to redirect the blood back into your gut, into your periphery and to your brain so that you can think clearly again, so that you can get back on an even keel again. But we know in the world that we live in that often there are all sorts of sources of stress which don't go away. And this is what we see in people who have a diagnosis of chronic exhaustion, is that they've had years and years and years where they've been in a constant state of fight and flight or freeze, and that this has had a significant impact on their body. So let's have a look at this domino effect and see what happens in your body when you have been going through years and years of chronic stress. So we see on here the trigger at the top right there, the red stressors trigger sign, and that causes the release of the stress hormones by your HPA axis. Remember, that's your hypothalamus, your pituitary, and your adrenals to create this fight or flight response. But that never subsides. And likewise, you are in a constant state of sympathetic dominance. So your nervous system is on a high alert all the time. And this means that those stress hormones build up in your body and they don't get a chance to actually dissipate. You don't go back into that state of balance. You're constantly in fight, flight, or freeze. And if you think about the physiological changes that happen in your body under fight or flight, your cognitive function shuts down. Well, this explains some of the brain fog that we see. You have a chronic situation in which your blood is not properly flowing to your brain. So you're not getting enough oxygen, but also the blood's function is to take the toxins away from the brain. So you get this toxic sense in your brain as well. Because your nervous system is in sympathetic dominance all the time, we get a very strong, very common sense of feeling tired and wired. So it's really difficult to get to sleep at night. And the longer that goes on, the more we get anxious about not sleeping, which just feeds into this whole cycle of anxiety and feeling tense all the time. And what happens when you tense? The blood can't get through to your muscles. And the blood is already compromised over a long period of time because it's being diverted to your heart and your lungs. So you've got the buildup of toxin in your muscles as well. So we get a lot of lactic acid buildup, and that causes pain. We have a lot of brain fog problems with word recall to do with all of this. But if you remember as well, the blood flow is diverted away from your gut. And if that happens over a long period of time, we have a lot of problems with poor digestion. So your gut is not being properly oxygenated. The toxins are not being taken away, but also you are not absorbing the nutrients. You're not properly digesting and absorbing the food that you take in. So we see a lot of food intolerances and IBS and bloating. And one of the other functions of the gut, which is not widely known, is that it's incredibly important in your immune system. So there is a knock-on effect here as well with your immunity, which drops off as well. So we see people who get an awful lot of infections. And this is where my recurrent tonsillitis came in. It may be another part of the body where you repeatedly get infections. So some people get an awful lot of colds or other things. And at the same time as all this blood flow is disturbed, you've also got this toxic bath of stress chemicals over your entire body. So again, it's not surprising if you can't think straight through the brain fog if your brain is bathed in cortisol all the time. So all your glands are bathed in cortisol, your muscles, every tissue, every cell in your body is bathed in hormones that are only actually supposed to be there in a crisis. But because you're never actually coming out of this sense of threat, your parasympathetic nervous system is not coming in to get you back into balance. Looking down at the bottom of this chart through all of these different symptoms, you can see now how the blood flow disruption and the hormonal imbalances also contribute to problems with cold hands and feet. The blood is not going to your hands and feet, because if you're under threat, you don't need your periphery to be functioning pretty well. So we sometimes see problems with Raynaud's disease. This is actually linked in as well sometimes to the freeze response, where actually the body, rather than being on high alert to run, just completely shuts down and everything slows. So your gut is sluggish, your thinking is sluggish, because what you are doing to survive is just trying not to be seen. So moving on to the left-hand side of this slide at the bottom, where you can see that we move from the hormonal disruption and that HPA axis of constantly churning out the stress chemicals to impact on your thyroid. And your thyroid is incredibly important for your energy metabolism. It regulates your body's metabolism. And over a long period of chronic stress, it's both damaged by the stress hormones, but also by the sheer pressure of having to keep functioning at such a high level. And so what we see an awful lot of is thyroid symptoms, where people's thyroids are just beginning to fail. So we see people with hypothyroidism who feel very cold all of the time, who have no energy at all. We also see people who develop symptoms, conditions like Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune condition. And you can see there that links back into what I was talking about with the immune system. And when the immune system goes really wrong, it turns on your body's own tissues to produce these autoimmune conditions. And that connects into the problems that we see with lots of allergies, skin conditions, lots and lots of sensitivities to food, all sort of connected into this disruption, this heightened nervous sensitivity, but also to the imbalance in your hormones. And of course, the hormones also regulate your blood sugar control through your pancreas. And so what we see, because of the imbalances that knock on from one system to the next, and the chemical imbalances between all these feedback loops in your hormonal system, is that you're no longer controlling your blood sugar as you need to. The insulin is impacted. And that's made even worse, because what do you do when you feel awful? You go for comfort eating. So we see people who tend to eat very badly. They will eat a lot of sugars and fats and carbohydrates, and that knocks the body chemistry off even further. High levels of glucose in your cells are really toxic. And so you can see all these little spirals. Everything is affecting everything else. And so what we have is across the body inflammation markers, and that comes out as pain, but also low levels of functioning in all of your tissues. We have high levels of toxin overload, because your liver is actually struggling as well, and particularly if you are taking an awful lot of different medications. There's another over the top of the stress hormones, and your liver not receiving the blood supply it needs. Because again, in the fight and flight response, you don't need your liver if you're just going to survive a tiger attack, do you? So your liver is shut down. Your liver is not processing the toxins that your body produces. It's not metabolizing and getting rid of the toxins from all of the medications that you're on. And that, again, feeds into this feeling of absolute bleh. And then you can end up with the headaches and the muscle and joint pain and the energy crashes. So let's take the focus down more narrowly now, beyond the organs, which are really struggling to fulfill their normal functions, right down to the level of your cells. And remember that every cell in your body is bathed in this soup of toxic stress hormones, which are not supposed to be there all the time. So every cell is being damaged. And that means that all of the different functions that these cells carry out in your body are affected. Now, if I take you back to school, and if you've done any cell biology at school, you might remember the tiny little organelles that are within every single cell in your body called mitochondria. And the phrase that most school children seem to remember is the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. So mitochondria look like tiny little sausages, and there are many, many, many of them in every cell. And their function is to metabolize energy and to take the glucose that is brought in your blood supply as the fuel and combine it with oxygen to produce energy. And that energy is what you need for absolutely every process. And what happens in your body when your cells are subjected to this long-term bathing in glucose and toxic stress hormones is that the number of mitochondria in every cell actually reduces. So it's as if you've actually cut out a large number of your internal power stations. And this explains a large part of why you feel so utterly bone deep exhausted. And not only that, but the mitochondria that you do have are not functioning terribly well. And I don't want to go deep into a lot of the biochemistry here. I want to keep it fairly simple. But one of the functions that happens in your cells is methylation. And this is why enzymes are involved in all sorts of processes around protein formation and the dealing with heavy toxic chemicals in the body, but also in your gene expression, turning on certain genes off and on in response to environmental factors. And so what can happen is that at that biochemical level, you are not able to actually produce the energy that you need in order to function on a day-to-day basis. And so it may be that you can find enough energy to do something one day, but actually it depletes you to such an extent that you are just completely wiped out for a couple of days afterwards. Or it may be that you see a time lag. That's a very common thing as well. And I'll explain why that happens in another video. So from all of this, you can see how what happens to you in your life over years and years and years of dealing with chronic stress has a very direct physical impact on your body. So it's not just that you're a bit tired and you're not making it up, but that normal stress response that is supposed to actually protect you goes wrong. And it has that cascade effect where that trigger that you've probably identified knocks over the first domino in your system, which has an impact right the way across every part of your body. And this is why you have such a apparently peculiar range of symptoms. So I hope that's been helpful in helping you to see that you're not crazy and you are allowed to have many things wrong at the same time. In fact, it is normal to have many symptoms, and that all of these symptoms are pointing back in one direction. And one of the most important things you can do is to address right at the root, why are you living with this chronic sense of threat? And that's a big task. It's something that's very difficult to do on your own, but at least it gives you somewhere to start from. And that is a large part of the work that I do and that we do at the Chrysalis Effect. Thanks for listening. If you found this video helpful, please do click on like below and subscribe to my channel. You might also like to hop across using the links to my Facebook or LinkedIn pages where you'll find much more content.